Sarah had always loved her Aunt Carol, a sweet, if slightly eccentric woman who lived in an old, sprawling house by a secluded lake in upstate New York. It was the kind of place you'd see on a postcard: tall pines, still water reflecting the sky, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. When Aunt Carol asked Sarah to house sit for a couple of weeks while she visited family in Florida, Sarah jumped at the chance. It sounded like a perfect, quiet retreat from the city chaos. A chance to unwind, read, and maybe even get some writing done. She arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the leaves already painting the landscape in fiery hues. The house itself was a relic, built in the early 1900s, with high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and more rooms than one person could ever truly need. Aunt Carol's unique taste in decor filled every corner: antique furniture, stacks of forgotten books, and everywhere, porcelain dolls. Sarah wasn't a fan of dolls. Their glassy eyes, frozen smiles, they always felt like they were watching. But Aunt Carol adored them, particularly one named Elara, a life-sized doll with intricate lace and eyes that seemed a little too real. Aunt Carol even talked to Elara like she was a person, a harmless quirk. Sarah had always thought the first few days were exactly as Sarah had imagined: peaceful. The quiet was almost deafening, after the constant hum of city life, broken only by the chirping of crickets at night and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. She'd spend her days reading on the porch, walking along the lake, and enjoying the solitude. But as the sun began to dip below the tree line each evening, painting the sky in oranges and purples, a subtle shift occurred. It started small, insignificant really. The house was old, so creaks and groans were expected, but some creaks didn't sound like settling wood. They sounded like footsteps. Faint, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the upstairs hallway. When Sarah was alone downstairs, she'd freeze, heart thumping, listening. But the sounds would always fade, leaving her to dismiss them as the house just doing what old houses do. The wind, perhaps, or the pipes, anything but what her gut was telling her. Then came the shadows, peripheral glimpses, a flicker in the corner of her eye, a darker mass against the already deepening twilight outside a window. When she'd turn her head, it would be gone, just the trees swaying, or her imagination playing tricks in the low light. She started to feel a prickle on the back of her neck, that distinct sensation of being watched. Not like a curious neighbor, but something colder, more intense. One evening, she came downstairs to find a book she'd been reading on the coffee table. She remembered leaving it on the nightstand upstairs. She shrugged it off. Aunt Carol must have moved it before she left, and Sarah simply forgot. But as the days bled into a week, these coincidences grew. A kitchen cabinet left ajar when she distinctly remembered closing it. A window latch undone, despite her always making sure they were locked. And the dolls, Elara specifically. Sarah was sure she had left the doll facing the wall in the living room, trying to avoid its unsettling gaze. Yet almost every morning, Elara would be turned, facing the center of the room, her ceramic eyes fixed on the doorway, always watching. The quiet, once a comfort, began to feel oppressive. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full of unseen eyes, unheard breaths, and a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on her chest. Sarah started to dread the evenings. She'd pull all the curtains shut, turn on every light, and blast music just to drown out the silence, to drown out the whispers she thought she was starting to hear. They weren't distinct words, more like a murmur, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around her. Sometimes it would intensify, sound almost like her name, whispered right at the edge of her hearing. Sarah's sleep became a luxury. Every rustle of leaves outside, every shift in the old house's timbers would jerk her awake, the heart hammering against her ribs. She'd lie there in the dark, straining her ears, convinced she heard something breathing in the room with her. The scent of old rosewater and something distinctly metallic, like forgotten blood, occasionally hung heavy in the air, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared. It was making her frantic. She started locking her bedroom door, piling chairs against it, a futile effort against something she couldn't even see. One night, the storm rolled in, a ferocious tempest, tearing through the pines, rattling the windows with violent gusts. Rain lashed against the old house and the lake, usually so serene, roared with a hungry intensity. Sarah was huddled under blankets, trying to read by the glow of a lamp, when the lights flickered. Then with a deafening crack of thunder, they died. Utter darkness enveloped the house, a darkness so profound it felt like a living thing. Panic seized her. She fumbled for her phone, its flashlight beam a pathetic spear against the overwhelming black. The silence that followed the power cut was terrifying, punctuated only by the relentless hammering of rain and the wailing wind. And then she heard it, clear as day, not a creak, not a whisper. A distinct, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, coming from upstairs, from Aunt Carol's room, the room where Elara and the other dolls resided. Every nerve ending screamed at her to stay put, to bury herself deeper under the covers, but a morbid curiosity, or perhaps just sheer terror, compelled her. Her legs, stiff with fear, carried her out of the bedroom, the phone's weak beam trembling in her hand. The air in the hallway was thick, heavy, colder than anywhere else in the house. The metallic scent was overpowering now, burning her nostrils. She moved slowly, one foot in front of the other, her breath catching in her throat. Each step on the creaky stairs felt like an explosion in the dead silence. The dragging sound had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural murmur. Closer now, much closer. As she reached the top of the stairs, her flashlight beam danced erratically, illuminating fleeting glimpses of the narrow hallway, the closed doors. The sound was coming from Aunt Carol's room, the door slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper black visible within. The murmuring was almost a growl now, a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. She pushed the door open, just a crack, and showed her light inside. The beam cut through the oppressive darkness, landing squarely on Aunt Carol's antique doll collection. They were all there, frozen in their positions, their painted smiles leering in the southern light. But Elara was different. The doll wasn't where Sarah remembered it. It was standing directly in the center of the room, facing the door, and its head was tilted. Not just a slight tilt from the floor, but tilted sharply to the side, at an angle no porcelain neck should ever be able to manage. Its eyes, those unsettling ceramic eyes, weren't fixed on the doorway. They were fixed directly on her. A cold breath smelling of damp earth and something rotten ghosted across her cheek. The murmuring intensified, right at her ear, distinct and sickeningly close. A deep, raspy voice. It wasn't whispering her name this time. It was saying something else, something about staying, about belonging, and then a sound, not from the doll, not from the shadows, from inside the doll, a faint, wet gurgle, like something trying to breathe or choke. Elara's mouth, painted in a permanent, serene smile, seemed to stretch subtly, impossibly, just for a split second, into something far more grotesque. Sarah screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from the deepest parts of her being. She didn't think, she didn't hesitate. She turned and ran. Down the stairs, not bothering with the creaks, not caring about the darkness, stumbling, clawing her way through the living room, past the terrifyingly still form of Elara, whose presence she could still feel, even as she fled. She burst through the front door, into the lashing rain, not even grabbing her keys, her phone still clutched in her hand. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, parked a good 100 yards down the driveway. Her hands shook so violently she could barely turn the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she tore out of that driveway, leaving the old house, the raging storm, and whatever nightmare resided within, behind her in a blur. Hours later, safe in a roadside motel room miles away, Sarah finally managed to call Aunt Carol. Her voice was hoarse, tears streaming down her face as she recounted the horror of the night. The footsteps, the whispers, the doll, the thing in the house. Aunt Carol listened patiently, quietly. When Sarah finished, gasping for breath, expecting reassurance, or perhaps even an apology, her aunt's response sent a fresh wave of terror through her. "Oh dear," Aunt Carol said, her voice unusually calm, almost knowing. "So, it finally got to you, did it? I told you, Elara doesn't like to be alone. She gets lonely." Sarah hung up. She never went back to that house. She never spoke to Aunt Carol again. The memory of Elara's tilted head, the gurgling sound, and that foul, cold breath on her neck are etched permanently into her nightmares. They just wait, in the quiet, In the dark,